Hey there, Capricorn, and welcome to your 2026 year ahead horoscope. We are going to look at the major shifts and changes that you will be experiencing in the coming year by looking at the planets Jupiter outward through Pluto in the sky and how they're going to be aligning with your chart. And this is going to be for Capricorn rising and Capricorn sun. Especially for Capricorn rising, then all of the placements that I'm about to describe will align perfectly with the whole sign houses in your chart. So this is an incredibly special year, 2026, due to this alignment that I'm showing on screen, which is going to take place in late July. And this is a very unheard of alignment. We haven't seen anything like this before, but we're going to get all of the outer planets, Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus, all lined up at 4 degrees of their respective signs and all aligned to each other in a very supportive way. We're also then going to get Jupiter aligned at 4 degrees of Leo, also feeding into this whole broader alignment here. It's a really powerful and potent moment. And it's kind of the culmination point of the year. So July and August are going to be really huge this year. But additionally, if you have any placements in your chart around 4 degrees, it would be really great to pay attention to those this year because they're going to get aspects from all of these back to back. And you can check if you have any placements at 4 degrees on astro.com, on astroseek.com. Of course, I also do personalized year ahead readings as well as natal readings, so I can also check into that for you. But there is that moment which speaks to some kind of a calling to a lot of different people who have those kinds of placements, somewhere around 4 degrees of pretty much any sign. So with that said, first we're going to look at all of these different alignments here. I'm going to give you some dates, and then we're going to go through and delineate each of these in turn, but we're also going to look as we go through them at how they're being reinforced by all of these other alignments as well. So we're going to wind up weaving that all together throughout this video. So we also have another really important alignment coming up this year, which is the Saturn-Neptune Conjunction that's going to be taking place at 0 degrees of Aries. And that'll be on the 20th of February of 2026. And that'll be just after Neptune moves into Aries into your 4th house. That's going to be on the 26th of January of 2026, and just after Saturn moves into Aries on the 14th of February of 2026. And beyond that exact conjunction that they'll have on the 20th of February, they will continue throughout the rest of the year to be co-present in this house of yours, in your 4th house. And in fact, Saturn is going to stay there with Neptune until 2028. And Neptune is going to stay there beyond that until about 2038, 2039. We also have Uranus moving into Gemini, and that'll be moving into your 6th house on the 26th of April of 2026. And that's going to continue not only through the end of the year, but that one will stay until about 2032, 2033 timeframe. We also then have Jupiter moving from your 7th house into your 8th house halfway through the year. So on the 30th of June of 2026, Jupiter will move into Leo, into your 8th house, and it's going to stay there again, not only through the end of the year, but into June, July of 2027. So that'll be there for a full year. Pluto is going to be in your 2nd house in Aquarius all year, but we're going to speak to that again because it's an important alignment to look at each year, but also especially because of the way that it's going to be reinforcing all of these other alignments as well. So we're going to take some time to remind ourselves what that's doing there. And then the eclipses are also going to be shifting this year, where our lunar eclipses are going to follow the theme that we've been dealing with since 2024. The lunar eclipses will again be in March in Virgo, in your 9th house. In August, we're going to get a lunar eclipse in Pisces, and that's going to be in your 3rd house. But overshadowing that to an extent is going to be that the solar eclipses this year are going to be in these new signs. As the nodal axis moves backwards in the sky, it moves retrograde. It's going to be moving from Pisces and Virgo into Aquarius and Leo. So that's where we're going to be getting our solar eclipses. On the 17th of February of this year, we'll get a solar eclipse in Aquarius in your second house. And on August 12th of this year, we're going to be getting a very big and significant total solar eclipse in Leo in your 8th house. So we'll also look at that and see what that means. And also look at how that's reinforcing the opposition between Jupiter and Pluto. So with all of that said, let's finally jump into the meaning behind this Saturn-Neptune conjunction that's going to be taking place in your 4th house. The Saturn-Neptune conjunction has a lot to do with dissolving old structures and reality testing one's faith in the status quo in the structures in one's life. So there's a lot of themes of healing, releasing, reimagining, matters of boundaries and discipline and effort and things like this. Also crystallizing a new dream into form as well. And in the 4th house, it's speaking quite directly to matters of home and family. Your roots may come up with this, ancestry, things like this. But primarily, it's going to have to do with your home, the people that you live with, and your family. So when it comes to authority figures within your family, when it comes to any sort of patterns of belief in your family, when it comes to any sort of structures or standards or needing to fit into certain boxes and expecting, especially if there's any sort of like expected reciprocation for that or something like this, there can be some sense of disillusionment around those roles within your family. What those mean, whether they're sustainable, whether they're fair, whether they're reasonable. There can generally be this kind of dawning awareness or dawning realization around those roles and what they mean. So a lot of those are going to come up for review. Some of those are going to be dissolved. Some of those are going to need to be renegotiated, realigned in order to function moving forward as well. There's going to be a lot of reality testing of expectations within family. So is there equal give and take? Are there double standards that may be arising? And the process that we deal with when it comes to Saturn-Neptune, and it's not just one thing, it will be layers. There's usually this kind of like peeling back of the layers of the onion with that Saturn-Neptune. But basically the way that that process winds up playing out is recognizing that there's something that wasn't quite what you thought it was, grappling with that, releasing some of that, and then deciding what is it that you're actually wanting to deal with. So for instance, with your family structures and roles and things like that, how do you want for your family to actually relate with each other? What does family really mean to you? What form do you want it to take? And more importantly, what are the values and the support systems that you're expecting there, that you're desiring at least there? And then with Saturn there, looking at how you can actually bring that into form. So how do you make that a reality? How do you crystallize that ideal around what family means to you into reality? So creating then that better aligned, more compassionate home or foundation to be working with there. So that can wind up going back quite a bit. This can speak to family patterns that may have been in place for generations that just don't feel like they quite fit anymore. And you may need to deal with some specific family members around that and make either boundaries clear or, again, expectations clear. So healing those ancestral illusions as well. You may even wind up learning something about your ancestry not being quite what you thought it was around this period of time as well. That is a very literal way that this could potentially wind up coming through. But additionally, even beyond trying to make the family structure work for you, like with your family members, this is also an internal process. So that's where the roots and your core winds up being spoken to here. So even just recognizing those patterns for yourself, recognizing the conditioning, recognizing what the family expectations, what those roles that you were put into, etc., what that has meant for you, and then reclaiming some authority over all of those things and the meaning of that for you. So, for example, we'll just go with some stereotypical roles. If you've been in a scapegoat role in your family for a while and you've internalized that as, oh, there's something a little bit off or weird about me, that can wind up setting into motion all sorts of specific types of relationships in your life, even beyond your family. It can have you questioning as to how high you should be reaching in your own life, etc. And a realization of, oh, this was just a role that I was cast in. It's not truly who I am. That's really powerful. And that's another thing that the Saturn-Neptune conjunction would be doing in this place. So building then out of that realization, a more authentic sense of who you are deep down, and then rooting your safety, your security, your sense of self deeply in yourself. And I also would recommend with this not to be shy about leaning into those ideals. Who do you want to be deep down? What kinds of energies fundamentally do you want to be working with in you and then in those around you as well? If you can get that ideal vision of who you want to be and, again, what role you want to play within your family or what kind of supports you're wanting from your family, etc., then you can set that Saturn on the task of creating that for you. This can also give you a lot more security in being emotionally honest with yourself, developing a sense of just fundamentally personal responsibility that isn't based on, again, other people's expectations or you needing to take care of other people or to fit in their boxes, to make them comfortable, etc., etc. So this is your emotional honesty with yourself and working on creating a foundation that really works for you. Now, beyond the family dynamics and things like that, this can also speak quite literally to your home and where you're living. So I wouldn't be surprised to see this play out quite literally in, there may be foundational issues, there may be structural issues. There can be a weakening of a structure in those early moments, especially when Neptune is right on top of that Saturn. So I would expect that around like February, March timeframe. I wouldn't be ignoring any structural issues within your home, possibly even related to plumbing or pipes or things like that with Neptune there, but it can be kind of anything. You may also feel just disillusioned with your home. It may have been a place or a structure that at one point you felt like you really wanted, but at this point you're recognizing isn't quite what you're wanting going forward. So one way that we could definitely see this playing out would be if maybe there's a bit too much square footage in your house or something like this, and you're kind of tired of feeling responsible for a bunch of stuff that you may have thought that you once wanted, but now you're realizing I'd actually really rather simplify things here. There is this back to basics aspect to Saturn and Neptune because they wear each other down, all of the BS, all of the illusions of each other, because they both definitely carry some BS with them. When they check each other, they wind up peeling all of those layers of BS away. And what you're left with is something that's a lot truer and a lot more real, but it is usually more simple of what you're working with. So this could be on that literal home level. It could be on that family level as well, of just wanting to simplify things, pare things down a bit, get back to basics, maybe release some drama or some of those like complicated, unnecessary relational dynamics or things like that, and just not want to deal with those anymore. Now, if you have a created family, so if you have children and either a partner or not, this is going to have your mind quite a bit on what you're wanting for that family structure to look like in that created family as well. And of course, there's a little bit more control that you can have there if you are one of the like authority figures of deciding how that's going to wind up looking. So again, this could be a back to basics thing in a created family of let's have dinner together most nights. Let's spend more time just with each other's company rather than scrolling and so on. There's this desire to get back to reality with your family, and additionally to deal with each other on this kind of real basis. So bring some kind of real connection back. So there's a lot of opportunity here to heal some ego attachments to old family structures or outdated roles that you are feeling here. Also to any sort of, specifically a home. If you're wanting to move, this could have you really taking that quite seriously, looking at what is that ideal that you have and how can you ground it into reality by applying practical frameworks to that ideal. A lot of the psychological layers that are going to be playing into this again are going to be about boundaries, which on the front end of this, again, when that Neptune is right on top of Saturn, that can be weakened. And there can be some confusion around those boundaries, some escapism that winds up playing out there where things are just a bit fuzzy and foggy when it comes to even the ego structure. And that may be that moment where you recognize, okay, I need to get more serious and take more seriously my boundaries, things like this. But also your responsibility just for yourself and your ability to exercise a level of maturity within your own life and not have that defined for you by someone else. This is also working on the level of imagination and idealization with Neptune there. It is a more grounded Neptune when it's dealing directly with Saturn. And again, you can crystallize things into form, crystallize those ideals into form better when you're dealing with Saturn as well. Another thing that can show up with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is a sense of guilt. And so try not to feel too guilty if you are needing to redefine some of your roles and expectations and things like that as well with your family. But yeah, ultimately, this is speaking to a completely new karmic cycle with regard to your family, those roles, your home, what home and family mean to you. That's all getting set into motion here. Those are the seeds that you're planting for a long-term new cycle here that should be lasting decades. So there's good reason to take this all really seriously, which we tend to do naturally when Saturn and Neptune are highlighting a specific area of our life anyway. But yeah, I think that's a lot of what I have around the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So let's go ahead and talk about Uranus in your 6th house. So this is going to play into a broader alignment that is taking place across your 6th house with Uranus here, Pluto in your 2nd, Jupiter in the 2nd half of the year in your 8th. That does look like it's going to be working on your working life, on the material aspects of your life, on potentially financial aspects of your life as well. And it looks like there's a shift there. So we'll look at this in that context as well, because it does look like it's playing into something that's a little bit bigger here. But this is speaking to Uranus and Gemini, innovation, freedom, disruption, acceleration as well, rapid change, things like this. And in your 6th house, that 6th house is speaking to matters of your routine, your habits, your schedule, your working life, the tasks and activities that you do, and especially those which you have to do kind of on a daily basis. So again, work. This is also a place of coworkers and subordinates as well. And it can be an area where health shows up. So we'll look at it from that perspective as well. But so this is speaking to your daily life and your work routines and things like this. So this does look like a major realignment of that. There's a disruptive quality to Uranus here, which seems to be pointing to that your workflow, your habits, your routines are going to be changing quite a bit in this coming year. Now, Uranus usually brings change in order to create a sense of liberation. So it may feel like your working life or your activities, this is even errands and things like that, has become stagnant, or maybe it feels like you're in a bit of a rut recently, that Uranus would be coming through to shake up this area of your life. So you could absolutely be embracing some flexible, kind of innovative approaches to your productivity in this period of time, and especially if your wellness is impacted by your productivity, then also to that aspect of refocusing, redoubling on paying attention to the impact that your working life and your duties and responsibilities have on your well-being. So this is breaking from convention, reimagining your systems of efficiency and productivity and so forth. So by developing and working on and focusing on efficiency and freedom in your daily routine, you're actually making that a lot more sustainable long term. And with the thing with Uranus is that if you try to resist that, if you try to keep things the same, that's when it can become a bit more disruptive. So usually we do want to get out ahead of this. And for you, it would just be looking at what you are able to tweak, what you are able to make more flexible when it comes to your working life and your routine and tasks and things like this. And maybe part of that with Uranus in Gemini here, that has been speaking quite a bit to the large language models and things like that. So AI, maybe there's something you can automate. Maybe there is something that, for instance, if you deal with a lot of emails or something like that, or you deal with a lot of little tasks that need to be scheduled out, maybe you can rely upon some of those systems or just technologies in general, updating, modernizing, upgrading, things like that, in order to make that all a bit more seamless or streamlined for you so that you can free up some time for yourself. Now, additionally, this is also just going to bring in a liberationary kind of impulse to that sixth house. So it's going to look at routines and productivity and things like this differently than you have in the past. It's going to introduce some novel ideas there or some novel interests of yours in terms of shaking things up. So if that's something that you haven't quite thought of a lot and you go through your day to day and you get your things done, but you haven't really laid out your daily routine or your weekly routine or whatnot. If you haven't really laid that out and looked at that to try to figure out where some of the inefficiencies are or where things could be a bit more enjoyable, etc., this would be really encouraging you to do that. On a health level, this can introduce some surprises. So if it is functional for you to be going to doctors kind of regularly and just not skipping checkups, not opening yourself up to any more surprises than necessary, that's usually quite helpful here. And especially paying attention to any sort of stress-induced or potentially stress-induced symptoms that you may be having. So it would be great with this in that house to be paying attention to your immune system. That is super related to your stress levels. You may even find that there is a diet thing, like something that you're eating that's a problem. And so therefore you could be switching that up and having that disrupt then even your diet for the sake of your health. But again, when we're looking at that, that can be annoying as a disruption, but it's ultimately trying to free you up from whatever the problem was with that. So there's almost always going to be a very helpful silver lining to any of the disruptions that Uranus winds up bringing in. And you may even wind up becoming really interested in health-related matters and in developing your well-being and introducing and kind of interspersing those aspects of life into your daily routine a little bit more intentionally. So there's a lot of opportunities around embracing greater freedom and authenticity in your daily life, bringing some new perspectives to what productivity means to you and what is a priority about that for you. You may experience some sudden breakthroughs along those lines as well. But Uranus can also be very independent, very intentionally independent. And so this could also have you so desiring to liberate yourself from a working routine in particular, or workplace, or coworkers, a working dynamic, something like this. If it feels like a cage, that Uranus is going to want to get you out of that cage. So this could also wind up encouraging you to go independent or to step into a different role or a different company if you work for a company, or a different field if the whole industry seems to be kind of plagued by similar issues. It's anything that you feel is really obnoxious and frustrating and feels like a cage about your routine. This is going to be trying to shake that up. And that can look, especially with that trine to Pluto and the sextile to Jupiter that it's playing into. So this broader configuration here, which is speaking to your money as well as your working life, you may find that there are some breakthroughs this year along the lines of making you independent. So maybe this is consulting, or maybe this is going into a business partnership for yourself or something like this. I would expect more opportunities, possibly surprising opportunities along those lines now as we're going forward, as for years you're going to have that Uranus in your 6th house, opening up doors to greater freedom and liberation within all of those daily life routines and things like this. There can also be some real creative genius that comes through when it comes to the skills and talents that you're bringing to the table. So you could be really shining in ways that you haven't up until this point in your working life, but it does create that kind of tension between teamwork versus individuality. So that is something to keep in mind. Usually, in my view, Uranus is going to give you a moment to figure out what you're going to do. So if you do feel caged in, good to think about that ahead of time. Good to figure out, where can I make some tweaks around the edges to make this a bit more tolerable while I'm figuring out the bigger, longer term plan of how to free myself up from frustrating aspects of life. So try to find that wiggle room for yourself in the meantime, because one thing that can come through and that is worth watching for with Uranus in the 6th is restlessness, like a deeply felt restlessness that's not just mental, and it's not just in relation to the routine, but it can really seep into your body in the 6th house as well. And that's where it can start to impact your health and so on. And that's also where those urges, that liberation impulse, can be so strong that you wind up rushing big decisions and things like that. So rather than rushing, finding those release valves where you can to avoid some of that nervous tension, to avoid some of that burnout as well. Now, another thing that can come through with this is kind of an erratic type of a schedule. For one thing, if you were to go independent, that would be a thing to grapple with, is that there's a lot more hats that you have to wear. And therefore, when it comes to your schedule, there's so many more switches basically that you're needing to kind of put into place. And again, playing like several different roles in a given day, it can feel a bit erratic. And then there's a real need to focus on that efficiency and time management, things like that as well. So that could definitely be the case. It may just be something that's coming through with a new role that you're filling in your workplace, or if you're switching to a different company, maybe things are a bit less structured there and you're needing to figure out how to manage your time on your own a bit more. There can be distractions and disruptions that come up as well with Uranus there, as well as some challenges with procrastination, things like that. And that's just you looking for the immediacy of the liberation. So if you notice the distractions, if you notice an inability to focus, if you notice a procrastination, if you notice that your time management is getting really poor, you're internally resisting what it is that you're needing to do. So rather than necessarily beating yourself up about that or making that more difficult for yourself by leaning into the procrastination and things like this, recognize that there's a frustration there and that something's not working for you. And so how do you get yourself to change that so that you're not feeling as much resistance when you're trying to get things done, right? So that's a lot of what that's going to bring in. Like I said, it's all silver linings in my experience when dealing with Uranus. Is it disruptive? Yes. Is there that kind of restlessness that comes with it? Definitely. And especially when it's in Gemini and it's in your 6th house, you'll feel that on a physical level at times as well. But the whole point of it is that it wants you to feel like you are in greater control of your daily life, and that your daily life feels more authentically aligned to you. So that's why it's trying to change that up. So looking at it that way, I think, is kind of half the battle when it comes to the big turnover and the big shifts and changes that are going to be coming up for you when it comes to that Uranus in your 6th house there. So as I said, that's going to be aligned to Jupiter in your 8th house. Jupiter in your eighth is going to be pretty interesting. Jupiter itself in Leo is going to be driving up a lot of courage, creativity, joy, optimism, and it can speak to a lot of like confidence and magnetism and leadership ability and things like this as well. So that's going to be playing out in addition to the usual aspects of Jupiter of luck and opportunities and doors opening and things just going a little bit more smoothly than usual. But also there can be a bit of excess and things like that. It's playing out in your eighth house, and your eighth house has to do with other people's resources that are tied to you. So it can be a partner's resources, it can be a business partnership itself and the profitability and the revenue along those lines. It can be any debts that you may carry, any loans. This could be related to mortgages, certainly, but also any dependencies and things like that. So then looking at that from an emotional or a karmic perspective as well, it also speaks to the dependencies, the vulnerabilities, the karmic ties that we have with other people and the entanglements that we find ourselves in as well on that kind of more of a karmic or emotional level. So this is also going to encourage leaning into connections with other people. Like I said, with that Uranus in the sixth house, that's going to bring up a little bit of tension between individuality, individual work, and teamwork. So that Jupiter is leaning that a bit more toward teamwork, not necessarily an over-reliance on other people or their approval or anything like that for reasons we're going to get into, but being able to recognize the social resources that you have available to you and then sharing your wins with other people as well. There's a lot of benefit in that for you when Jupiter is in your eighth house. And it's even spending the first half of the year wrapping up its time in your seventh house, which is also encouraging a lot of mutual benefit in your connections with other people. So this is speaking to a bit more deeper connections where there are matters of vulnerability and trust that come up as well. So developing those trust muscles, developing those connections, being willing to make commitments with other people, but without just looking at that as something necessarily that you're needing, or again, an over-reliance upon those things. This is about mutual effort and mutual trust and mutual commitment that should be really helpful in this year. And that should be encouraging your confidence as well and your self-image. So bringing a lot of optimism and enthusiasm to your connections all year, that's going to be really helpful to you. There may be opportunities or doors open to establish emotional or financial partnerships that are going to be quite beneficial and that may wind up being financially very profitable as well, given the opposition between Pluto in your second and that Jupiter in your eighth. That kind of an alignment between Jupiter and Pluto tends to speak to large sums of money in and of itself and power through financial controls and things like this. So the fact that that is happening along the axis of your finances and that which you're carrying with others, that speaks to some potential real wonderful opportunities for financial growth in this year, and especially where it concerns financial partnerships with other people. So pay attention to those doors that are opening up there. Additionally, this is going to encourage generosity and affirming others, mentorship, taking care of others. But I will say that that can go to extremes, certainly. And in that July-August timeframe, you may want to watch for an irrational level of giving. So just keep it in a common sense, reasonable, kind of a level. And I think you should be fine. But you might feel like you want to give maybe way more than you should. So something to kind of keep in mind there. There's that kind of big-heartedness, but beyond the financial aspect, also then looking at this from an emotional standpoint, this could also have you taking under your wing or taking a lot of pity upon people who have Jupiter in the eighth house, some big problems of their own, some big complications, their own psychological stuff going on. This, to me, the eighth house is the house of the psychological kind of underpinnings of those that you're dealing with. And you may find yourself dealing with greater emotional or psychological complications on the part of someone else than you're signing up for. So try to suss that out a little bit ahead of time before you kind of go all in, becoming a kind of de facto counselor to someone who may be creating for themselves a lot of problems. So that big-heartedness is wonderful. And keeping other people in mind is really great here. But again, the issue with Jupiter is that it just can sometimes go a bit overboard. Additionally, this is going to help quite a bit with your own shadow work, especially with regard to looking to others for affirmation or not rooting your sense of self-value and self-esteem deeply in your own self, looking for that out in other people, out in the world. So developing that confidence, not just through your ability to work well with others, but through embracing your own shadow work and your own self-trust as well through this period of time. So looking at any insecurities that wind up coming up through this time, they may also, that question around security versus insecurity may come up quite poignantly at points during the summer of 2026 as well. Just because there are triggers that are implied by that opposition between Jupiter and Pluto as well that can be quite powerful. And not only is that axis a financial axis, but it's also the security and insecurity kind of questions, that emotional level that winds up coming through with that as well. So there's a lot of opportunities with that in strengthening a sense of leadership in your partnerships with other people, trust, an ability to share and to work well with others as well. But there is a bit of needing to watch for a need for validation from others as well, or a need to have people dependent upon you. I would also watch out for any sort of financial drama or envy or jealousy or things like that when it comes to the resources you have, the resources other people have, especially again in that summertime of 2026 when that opposition is closest between Jupiter and Pluto. I would also really watch out for those power plays, especially from people who have quite a bit of financial capital that they are able to kind of control people with. If you see that, it may be well worth stepping back from that or trying not to get too overly entangled with any sort of financial power plays and things like that. Hopefully that optimism and the confidence that you're building there can free you up from feeling the need to curry favor with those that you view as having resources that you yourself would like to develop as well. I hope that that makes sense. Also watch out a bit for indulgence. So indulgences in other people, indulgences in emotionally complex kinds of relationship dynamics and things like that. Just try to keep an eye and make sure that those are at a healthy level. Also, watching out for pride or too great of a sense of pride, blocking true intimacy with people. So one way that this could look would be like making checklists or the whole I'm great, you need to do this and this and this for me kind of an attitude that sometimes we see with people, I think, increasingly recently. So trying not to fall into those kinds of things. But this is going to be really just opening so many opportunities for expansion of the resources you have available to you if you work with clients. That is super wonderful. And again, I would expect a very profitable summer for you. It's opening a lot of doors to abundance and just feeling like financial resource aspects of your life are going over kind of shockingly well. And again, the opposition to Pluto is going to be reinforcing a lot of that as well. So that is also empowering the heck out of you when it comes to your own resources. So when we're dealing with Pluto, these are themes of power, transformation, regeneration, depth, surrender, really deep change, purging that comes through, empowerment, and facing the shadow that winds up coming through with Pluto wherever it's showing up in our chart. And this showing up in your second house, that is the house of your own resources, financial, material, in terms of possessions, but also in terms of emotions and the skills and talents that you bring to the table. What is your value? as a human being, not just the things you own, but also your intrinsic value. It also speaks to your values. What is a priority for you? What do you value in your life as well? So there is this reconstruction and potentially building up of that value system of yours, releasing and purging some old, outdated notions of what you should be prioritizing or what financial truths you should be integrating, what investments you should be making, what you are bringing to the table. So purging any unhealthy kinds of dynamics there. If you have felt like you've struggled with your own value or truly believing in what it is that you're bringing to the table, sometimes that looks like imposter syndrome, where you know you can do a certain thing, but for some reason you just kind of question the value of what that is, or whether you're actually able to do it at the level you know you can, things like that. This is going to be helping to face those kinds of shadows and to release some of that. The opposition to Jupiter up in the 8th should also be helpful along these lines, and especially around regenerating a sense of self-trust and self-value. This can also have you exerting a lot of willpower over, again, what it is that you're bringing to the table. So you may be developing those skills. You may be developing your value and making yourself more valuable even throughout this period of time. And it may be a major priority of yours to do that during this time, to build up your value so that you're able to bring more value toward you from that as well. And it can be really helpful to place a lot of worth then in that willpower, in that inner strength that you carry, and not just the external markers of status or success or something like this, because it's likely that those aren't really going to reflect your own priorities or your own sense of alignment. And when you can focus on your own priorities, your own alignment, that does tap you really powerfully into resources that may be around that you're able to tap into. So looking at what you're able to become, what your value is able to become through a greater sense of alignment. And again, that's going to play into that Uranus in your 6th house, which is shaking things up and trying to liberate you from any sort of stagnant routines or habits or things like that as well. This is going to be developing a sense of a lot of self-belief in your ability to push yourself to the next level here. Now, there can be power struggles. Again, I'm going to highlight the summer, that the Jupiter-Pluto opposition in the world and for everyone is going to point to there's going to be some kind of a power struggle there. It's going to be at different levels for each of us in our own personal lives, depending on how much we enable that to, be a factor in our lives. But it can be big ego and big shadow clashing with that opposition. And so when you get that all mixed up, you wind up with issues of jealousy, envy, projection, triggers, things like this, that push and pull, trying to get the upper hand on someone else, trying to push someone else down, things like this. So all those yucky kind of power and control dynamics, manipulations, and things like that, they can totally come through when we're dealing with these planets. And so those may be around resources in your experience in this coming year. And that's kind of important. So I would say if you see any sort of issues like that arising, if you see people who are weirdly envious of what it is that you have or what you bring to the table, or your confidence in yourself or your ability to work with others, taking note of that and maybe trying not to have that kind of an energy around so much. And what's interesting about that, and really any experience that we wind up having with those kinds of power dynamics as we step away from them and recognize them, is that it just helps a lot to realign us and to enable us to see potential pitfalls before we wind up stepping into them, even going forward then. So it can be really powerful and fortunate to be able to see who is approaching me from a place of envy, who is maybe trying to, quote unquote, knock me off my high horse, even though I'm not, things like that. So watching out for those kinds of people, watching out for people who may try to hold over your head some kind of a dependency. If that is the case, that is exactly what this would be saying. you're going to want to take note of that. You're going to want to change that situation for yourself. And I would very much warn big time around doing that to anyone else, because when we start to get into those games and Pluto is speaking directly to those themes for us around resources and control and things like that, that's when we wind up getting into the more challenging aspects of Pluto where it can kind of kick our ass a bit. So we don't want to step into those kinds of traps either, regardless of what side of it we're on. So a lot of opportunities here to transform your sense of self-worth and your values, to reclaim your control and power over what is a priority for you. And this may mean that you're purging some old priorities or some old roles that you have played, or some old security systems like comfort zones around playing small, so that you don't have to deal with the potential complications or emotional investment that goes into really putting yourself out there and really holding yourself up and trying to push yourself again to the next level. So where you've held yourself back in that way, it could require some purging along those lines, but this is trying to really empower you through that kind of intense purification and renewal process that'll go on in phases to differing levels of intensity for about 20 years. If I didn't mention, I can't remember if I did, but Pluto's going to be in the second house of yours until 2043, 2044. So you'll deal with different phases of this, and it's not always going to be full volume at all. But one thing that this can really help with quite a bit is putting you in touch with subconscious drives and desires. And even it can point out where there is some obsession. It can also encourage some obsession around resources. So you may find yourself really obsessively saving or really pushing for more money. That may be your main driver for a little while. And I wouldn't say that that is necessarily all bad. But again, we just want to keep in mind where things can get a bit out of hand, both with Jupiter and with Pluto as well. There can also be some fear that comes up with Pluto. So if you feel like you're getting into any sort of irrational fears, or that is pushing the obsessiveness or the intensity of willpower and drive and things like that around like a scarcity mindset or something like that, that is also something to keep in check. And yeah, ultimately what this is speaking to is a level of emotional honesty and healing that is being encouraged here for you with regard to what you find valuable, putting you in touch with what is it that resources mean to you. It's not just the numbers. There's an emotional thing behind that. So what is significant to you on a level of emotional security and stability? What is it that you're really looking for there? What is it that's truly valuable to you? Is it a big house, or is it simplifying and being able to pare back and being able to just kind of enjoy the finer things in life? Is there a really strong drive to maybe for like 5 or 10 years here, really kind of pedal to the metal, drive up as many resources as you can so that you can free yourself up a bit later? Maybe you can retire a bit early. Like, what is it that is underlying the significance of material resources for you? Because there's always something more emotional to that. Additionally, if there are any dependencies here, that Pluto is going to be pointing out to you, and it will be encouraging you a lot to not be overly dependent upon others materially, financially, for affirmation or for validation or things like that. That Pluto is calling on you to reclaim all of that power over yourself. Now, again, that doesn't mean don't go into partnership with other people, but it does mean make sure that you do genuinely feel like you have plenty of control and power over your own resources, such that absent any connection, you would be fine on your own as well. But yeah, that's a lot of that Pluto stuff. So the eclipses are also going to play into this. Like I said, you're still going to have those lunar eclipses in your 9th and 3rd houses. And that's going to be speaking to matters of your ideas, your mind, learning, communicating, traveling, connecting with people. So there's likely to still be some movement along those lines. You may be shifting and changing some of your ideas about the world, your worldview, your philosophy could be coming up. You may want to travel quite a bit and shake things up and expand your horizons a bit, explore your community a bit more, connect with people more. You may want to take some courses or classes because you may desire a greater level of mental stimulation around this period of time as well. There may be some like legal documentation. Try to make sure that you're on top of that, I would say, because that's some annoying eclipse stuff that can come through as there's any sort of legal documents, which means anything to do with the government, anything to do with contracts, anything to do with agreements that you've made with other people, etc., that could come up in the February, March, and then July, August timeframe. I'd be keeping an eye on that because third house is going to have to do with the documents. Ninth house is going to have to do with the legal requirements and things like that aspect. So that you're still going to be kind of dealing with. You've been dealing with some of those themes since about 2024 with the eclipses. But the solar eclipses, which do tend to be a bit more poignant and loud and obvious, those are going to be shifting as the nodal axis does, which is the point that defines where the eclipses are going to take place. That is moving backwards from Pisces and Virgo into Aquarius and Leo. So you'll get a solar eclipse in February in your second house, which will be speaking quite directly to that growth through self-reliance, through development of your resources, through greater control over your resources. So maybe this is budgeting or getting really clear about where you're standing financially, but then also emotionally. And again, bringing yourself back to what are my values, what are my priorities, getting really clear about all of that. And you'll also then get a south node solar eclipse, which is going to be a very long total solar eclipse up in your 8th house. Now, south node eclipse, that has to do a little bit more with release. It is something that we may overly rely upon. And so there is an encouragement to not overly rely upon this area. And that's part of what that solar eclipse is going to be speaking about with you, or some lessons or something that is set up along those lines. Those themes are going to be what I said about the over-reliance and the going to extremes of Jupiter. So this is that over-reliance upon other people, upon your relationships, upon that outside validation, upon that dependency. So releasing dependency on others. And what's interesting, though, is that with that solar eclipse in your 8th, plus Jupiter in your 8th, regardless of which side of the nodal axis this is on, this is likely to proliferate the amount of potential connections that are likely to be beneficial mutually, and especially when it comes to resources and things like that. It's likely to open doors to those things. But through being really clear with yourself about where you stand and not needing, but being able to mutually benefit from those connections that are coming through, that's really going to be the way to get the best out of these alignments that are coming up for you. Keeping in mind that that south node is up in the 8th house, where it's saying, hey, but don't over-rely upon this. Don't over-depend on the outside for resources and validation. So the shadow side of this, when we're dealing with the 2nd and 12th and 8th house, and we are also dealing with that opposition between Jupiter and Pluto, is going to be around those issues of control and fear of vulnerability, fear of self-reliance, fear of defining for yourself what your values are and that mismatching with the people that you're in partnership with. Just relying strongly on being authentically yourself, on carrying the values that you have, and allowing for that alignment to open doors to connections that are mutually beneficial with other people who also share those values and those beliefs and are willing to build with you. So yeah, I do have to say, this could be a weirdly powerful year for you financially, possibly way more than you're expecting. Again, that is a super loud Jupiter-Pluto opposition across the 2nd, 8th house axis. So I would be keeping an eye open for those lucrative opportunities that could be coming in and things like that. But yeah, I think that that is pretty much what I have for you, Capricorn. So I hope that this was helpful. And if it was, and you don't mind giving it a like or a hype, I would really greatly appreciate that. And as I mentioned, if you would like a personal year ahead reading, which is tailored to your entire natal chart and placements, I do offer that at Sociastrology.com. There's also information in the description box below for memberships where we discuss astrological topics each month. And we also do weekly forecasts if you would like to join that or look at those perks. And do consider sticking around by subscribing. We tend to look at the alignments in this way. So I put out videos weekly, which are going to speak to major transits that are going on in the sky. We'll look at the global geopolitical perspective of that and what's likely to occur there, the impact on the collective energies, and then also the personal impact on our own charts based on which houses those transits are taking place in. So if that is of interest to you, then yeah, I would love to have you here for future videos. And again, I hope you have an absolutely beautiful 2026. And thank you so much for spending this time with me.